Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I'm Not Gonna Be Quiet. My name's Danica, and I'm your host. If you have been with me since the beginning, or if you're a first-time listener, I want you to know that this is a space where folks step into the circle of community to share the path that they've traveled to find liberation after periods of staying silent about their experienced pain and harm. In each interview, we get a chance to hear and learn from our guest what they refuse to be quiet about, what their silence cost them, and the price they paid for their freedom. I'm here, you're here, community has been established, so let's get free together. Y'all, I'm excited for another deep interview, and I want to just kind of give a content alert. Some of what we're going to be talking about today can be activating. As you know, I do this podcast so that we can learn how to heal ourselves and extend that to others by witnessing, listening to our stories. And today we're going to be talking with a sister who has survived significant trauma. And some of it is SA trauma. And so I want you to help me welcome my guest, Kwamisha. She is a mother, she's an author, she's an advocate, and more than a lot of those things, she's a survivor. I found her on TikTok. She just came up in my FYP page, and she was so free. She was so liberated. She was talking about some of her experiences and how she got free. And I thought, this is someone I want to talk to. This is someone who has been through some things, survived it, overcame it, and is now just leveling up, right? Now she is healing and recovering, and she is willing to share some of what she went through. So please join me in welcoming Kwamisha. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Danica. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. If anything, I'm going to create community with sisters who, are looking to heal themselves and share that healing with others. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into, those I'm not going to be quiet questions.
So as she said, my name is Kwamisha. I am an author. I currently have a book available on Amazon. It's a memoir. It's called In My Mother's Shadow, where I kind of just highlight some of the more traumatic experiences through my childhood and young adulthood. And the motive for writing the book was really so that people could have a better understanding of the events that took place, but not only that, where I was mentally and psychologically during that time period. Because I find that sharing my story is really hard for people to grasp the depths of it. And so I figured if I could put it into words and have people write it, they would get a better understanding of it. I'm also a mother. I'm a mother to 7 beautiful children, 5 boys and 2 girls. And these days I'm just busy creating and trying to spread awareness about, the effects of those type of things and encourage people to really dive into their own healing. And so, again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be able to speak on that with you, Danica.
Before we get into it, I want to learn a little bit about your book. Tell us your pronouns and tell us where we can find you on social media.
So my pronouns are she, her, hers. And right now you can find me on TikTok. My handle is The Empress, THEE Empress 811, or Truly Divine on TikTok. I am on other platforms, but I don't frequent those as I do TikTok. So if you really want to interact with me, your best bet is to find me on TikTok. I also have a podcast on Spotify, Apple, and iHeart. It's called Divine Intervention with Truly Divine. And I kind of just drop some gems on there. It's short and sweet and to the point. So be sure to check that out as well.
That's fantastic. So I wasn't even, I forgot that you mentioned that you were, that you have a podcast. We definitely want to elevate that and amplify it. Because again, it sounds like it's a place or a space where folks can heal. Again, I love that. So tell me about the process of writing this book. It's In My Mother's Shadows, Amazon. You can find it there. What motivated you to write this book? Because writing is very therapeutic. It also takes a lot of commitment, right? So I'm curious, where did that come from?
So when I first started my healing journey, I found that it was really hard to communicate certain things to the people that were involved with my trauma, like my mother and my stepfather, of course, because he's deceased now. But so I started writing letters to them and burning them. And that was very therapeutic for me. And so again, once I started openly speaking about my situation to other people, I was getting a lot of questions about, well, how did this come about? I'm confused. And it's like, until you're in that predicament, you really can't grasp the depths of it. And so I figured, writing the book, having something tangible for people to go and read and hold, and to read my words, to kind of put them in that time, in that place of those events, would give people a different perspective and a better understanding. And so it came fairly easy. I finished within the month of writing it, of course, because it was what I experienced, is how I really felt. And so it wasn't hard at all. But like I said, the encouragement and the motivation behind it was to really get people to understand me, and not just what I could tell them or the questions that I can answer verbally.
Yeah. So I guess let's get into it. What the trauma that you're talking about in your book? Can you share a little bit?
Yes. So I started being abused, SA'd by my stepfather at the age of 5. And it was something that went on daily and into my young adulthood, which resulted in the birth of 2 of my children, who are now 11 and 15 years old. Him and my mother were married for 13 years. And so part of me feels like she was aware of it, especially certain instances where I feel like she was a part of it. And so it was really hard for me to verbalize what was going on to her, because I feel like we had an understanding, even at a young age, and being as though their relationship was so toxic. He was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she was very promiscuous and within their relationship. And so they argued and fought a lot. There was a lot of police involvement. And so I was kind of always put at the forefront of their arguments. I was her backbone. She would, have me to vouch for her during certain things and lie for her. And so at that point, I kind of felt that she allowed those things to occur to keep the peace within the relationship, to keep him happy, so that he didn't focus so much on what she had going on within the relationship. And at some point during the duration of, my father being alive, she had left and remarried and started her life. So at that point, I literally became the woman of the house, as far as, cooking and cleaning, and being with my stepfather in that way sort of became a chore for me. I just looked at it as another thing to cross off my to-do list at that point, because, I disassociated at a very young age. And so every decision that I made from the age of 5 up until, the birth of my second child was based on being in survival mode. It was based on being, in that traumatic experience. And so I found it hard to connect with people. I was a quiet girl in school. I didn't say much because I had too much to say and didn't know how to say it, type of thing. And so I didn't have a childhood, I didn't have a young adulthood. And so, but I'm glad today that I can speak on it and, be an inspiration for others, because it's something that's so common yet so unspoken, because of the results of the person speaking out about it.
And thank you. I just want to express gratitude for your ability to share so candidly and openly, because I imagine there's still some hurt attached to that. That's a lot to live through.
It is, because that inner child in me still longs for that relationship with my mother. But the healed version of me had to say it's not good for you, and to release it and let go of it. And a major part of that was being able to forgive those that were involved. And because the longer you hold on to those negative emotions, the more it holds you back from prospering. And then it rolls over into your relationships with your children and your significant other. And so it's very important to be able to forgive and really, truly let go of things that are hurting you.
Yeah. So we're not going to get into any other detail. I just want the listener to know that's kind of as deep as it goes. Having said that, I do want to just hold space with you and for you and acknowledge that I hear what you have shared, and I am sorry that you were forced to be a sacrificial lamb. I'm sorry that the adults that were responsible for protecting you did not do their job. What you went through, I think but as someone standing in solidarity with you, as a sister with a desire to protect you, I want you to know that what I'm sure has been said, and but I think it begs to be said that none of this was your fault. You didn't deserve it. I wish it hadn't happened. I'm so glad that you survived it.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I hear you when you talk about the inner child, right? Wanting still, pieces of her wanting to have that mother's love and that protection, right? And it makes sense, right? Your memoir is In My Mother's Shadow.
Yeah.
What was the process in accepting that it was not going to be that and letting go?
Yeah, over the years after that, because again, my stepfather died in 2013. And so the years following were very, they were freeing, but I still felt that I was trapped because of my mother, because she started blaming me for my own suffering. And telling, the people around us that I was a willing participant. She would, go and talk about me to other people and things of that nature. And whenever I would approach her about it and want to talk to her about it, she would shut down, or she would get defensive or angry. And so after a while, I was always the one coming to her apologizing when we would argue, even if I felt that I wasn't wrong in the situation, because again, I still long for that. And so I really had to get tired of being treated that way, and explain to my inner child that, this is not good. And she's never going to take accountability. We are never going to be able to have that sit down and have that open and honest conversation where she can express how she feels and I can express how I feel without coming to blows or being, overly defensive. And so I really just came to terms that it wasn't healthy. And if I wanted to be healed, if I wanted to really be, you're never over it, but if I wanted to be in a space where I could better handle it, I had to remove myself from that situation and those people. And that was really, and more so because of my children. I didn't want my children to see me trying to keep a relationship with someone that truly did not appreciate me and my value, because I'm trying to teach them to know their worth. And so I have to be the example for them. I can't be, preaching one thing to them and I'm still over here running behind my mother, who obviously could care less about me.
Yeah. And so this kind of just supports my theory. I always talk about healing, and a lot of times healing is always marketed through the lens of education or therapy. But there's not one way to heal and recover. And I truly believe, right? Because when you look at it in that binary, right? It's either reading a bunch of books or going to therapy. And if you don't have access to those things, what happens to everybody else? What has been happening to millions and millions of people over millions of years, right? So I believe that I think most people, you experience trauma, right? Because I believe everybody in the world experiences trauma at some point in their lifetime. And usually for the bulk of us, it is within our childhood. And as we kind of chronologically matriculate through age, we are able to look back at some childhood experiences and remember correctly what we experienced was wrong. And how do we know it was wrong? Because it made us feel horrible. It made us feel depressed and anxious and scared. And so as an adult looking at those childhood experiences, we then are at a crossroads, right? We can say, that happened to me. It made me feel horrible. I don't want to do that to somebody else. And we figure out a way to change those behaviors, right? Minimally, we don't recreate the same dynamic. Or what happens is people say the same thing. That happened to me as a child. It was wrong. I should have, it should have never happened. I don't want that to happen. I don't know how to change it, but also it's kind of what I'm familiar with. Yeah. And that's, that's not like specific to your specific situation, but in general, right? In terms of general trauma, I think sometimes we don't know what the road to recovery looks like, but what we can minimally commit to is not replicating what we went through.
Yeah.
And so, I appreciate, again, what you're sharing about your process of detaching from someone who was never able to love you the way that you were intended to be loved, or protect you the way you deserved to be loved, to give you your birthrights, right? Because that's everyone's birthright. Those are not things that you have to bargain for or haggle or barter or beg for. They're literally your birthrights. The moment that you are even thought of and conceived and living within the womb, that's your instant birthright. It's not something you have to work for. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot to detach yourself from that.
It does. It really does. And that's why I tell people it's really important to develop a relationship with God. I know people are not, these days are not overly religious, and you don't have to be, but to know that there is a higher power, a higher force that has influence in your life is very important. And also developing a relationship within yourself, because going through something traumatic, as I stated, you disassociate. And so you really have to get back to knowing yourself. You have to get back to loving yourself regardless of what you've been through. And so it is a process. It's not easy, but as long as you ask for the strength and the endurance from the Most High, you'll be able to make it through. And so to those that are listening, I just want you guys to be encouraged and know that all things are possible. Just have the faith and persevere and be persistent, because it can get, be persistent, because it can get ugly. That dark night of the soul, those emotions come up, they resurface for you to deal with them. And the more that you suppress those feelings and emotions, the more you're holding yourself back. So you have to deal with those things, even if, it gets ugly. Take time to separate yourself, to do some soul searching, journal, get outside and meditate, go for a walk, just openly speak with the Most High. Like I said, I'm not sure what people refer to their higher power, but I want to say God. Just develop that relationship with God and within yourself, and it will make the transition a lot easier. But you have to be determined. At some point, you have to get tired of those habits and behaviors, So it really starts with you.
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. And I think that's so helpful, because I think most people can connect to an idea of God, regardless of what it's called, or spirituality, or Allah, or Jesus, or Buddha, or whatever it is. There's something bigger than us. And I think people can hear that and relate to it and go back to it as a source of strength, and as, something to kind of push them further along in the healing process. I also appreciate that you highlighted dissociation, right? Like, to be able to disassociate from what is happening in real time is a defense mechanism, and defense mechanisms are designed to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so glad to hear that you were able to recognize when you had to shut everything off and shut it down just to physically exist and get to the next moment and the next day. Right? And then find those moments where you could turn yourself back on and experience a little bit of like vitamin D, right? Like some sunlight. It's so critical. I think we do that all the time, right? Because this world is, set up to, I think a lot of times, take so much from us. Right? Yes. In terms of living within a construct of capitalism and colonialism, it's really designed to have a greater separation between the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are usually only that 1%, which are white men. And their history with violence, and then the way that it has just been like disseminated throughout our culture over the last 400 years, it makes sense that so many people are unwell. And it also makes sense that those who are striving to be well and the unwell use dissociation as a tool to either protect themselves or to harm others without the feeling of regret or guilt.
They go into they go into survivor mode. And a lot of people are triggered by things that they don't realize, they don't acknowledge it as a trigger. And that causes people to disassociate as well. And so if you're not aware of these things, if you're not dealing with these issues and these traumas and these pain, then that is why your triggers are allowed to control you. That is why other people have power over you, because you are, you're easily moved or, intimidated by the things that they do and they say, and you allow it to ruin your whole day. And so that's really what it means when we say you give your power away to people, because you allow them to affect you emotionally. So you have to find that emotional balance within yourself. You have to train your mind to transmute a negative thought into a positive thought, and learn how to not let one bad apple ruin the whole bunch type of thing, and so it's mind over matter. Like I said, it's willpower, it's determination. And like I said, you have to get tired at some point of living the way you're living, because I'm pretty sure if you're a person that has experienced these things and you have not been working on yourself, you have not been healing and releasing, it's affecting you in your everyday life. And you probably just haven't been able to recognize it as that's what it is. And that's really what shadow work is. That's really where the title of the book came from. Because I believe that my mother was parenting me from her own traumas and her own pain. And so it became generational, it became a cycle, and that's where the inspiration for In My Mother's Shadow came from. And so has she taken the responsibility of her own healing and accountability for her actions, we probably would have had a whole different dynamic in my childhood and throughout my adulthood as far as our relationship goes.
Yeah. I appreciate the tools that you're sharing that you've used and have worked for you and what others can do. So obviously creating a relationship with God was helpful to you. You also talk about the journaling that led to the writing of your memoir. How easy or challenging was it for you to just recount what had happened in word? How therapeutic was it?
Initially, it was really hard. I would read prompts of my book to my significant other at the time, and during certain instances and in certain parts of the book that I was reading, I had to stop because it was triggering me again, and I was unaware of how just writing it was different, but to sit there and read it back to someone else, I didn't realize how triggering that was. And so it took me a second to actually be able to go back and read my book, I wrote the whole book out and then went back to read it. And like I said, it was easy for me to write it, but to actually go back and reread it to someone else, it really hit different. That's what they say, it hit different.
Yeah.
Because
I love that.
Harbored a lot of that anger and that hate. And again, that was a process. I had to realize why these things were so triggering and to begin with. And it was because I was still holding on to those emotions. And so once I let those things go, it became easier to speak about it.
Yeah, that's it, right? I appreciate being able to have these conversations, whether they're intimate and private or on a podcast like this, because either way, what I've learned in my own healing process and just within the work that I do, specifically with women, individual and group settings, is that once you say your truth, it liberates you.
Yeah.
In a way you've never been liberated before. And the more you say it, the more you're free, right? The shackles are removed, and you begin to create a greater distance between you and what happened to you. Because a lot of times when you're in the mix of it all, right, we take on the identity of what happened to us as it being us, but it's not, right? It really is separate. And so this is why I love just creating a space where sisters can talk about what they've been through and how they are moving through it, or want to move through it, or have moved through it. Because again, the tongue it's mighty, strong, right? It's a releasing and it's a cleansing. So I appreciate you sharing that.
So much. I appreciate you for what you do and giving a platform for us to be able to sit here and communicate these things to everyone else that's listening. It's very important, especially for people of color, to have platforms, in this time. And so thank you so much for what you do.
Well, it is my pleasure. And I appreciate you saying that, because it's not lost on me, and in order to have authentic community with each other, we need to be able to see each other's light and name it and say it. So I appreciate that. Okay. So I guess let's go over these questions, right? We've learned so much and it's been so helpful. What have you refused to be quiet about?
My trauma, my pain, the abuse, the injustice.
Yes, Ashe. Yes, the injustice of it, right? I love that. That's so important. That's so important, because I know I'm repeating myself, but what we experienced in childhood should have never happened.
Yes.
It should have never happened. And there is a deep injustice, right? And that's a part of the recovery. So I'm so glad you used that language. Okay, so what would you say, what was the harm or hurt that you were experiencing during that time of injustice?
My mental health. It was very detrimental to my mental health. And, because it changed the way I viewed myself. It changed the way I viewed the world around me. I didn't feel like it was a safe space. I didn't trust myself, and so it was very detrimental to my mental health during that time.
That's so accurate. And that kind of fits into the next question. But before that, I just want to, expound on that, right? A lot of times we experience these things in childhood and we don't quite recover. And then in adulthood, it disrupts our relationships. And we often internalize that as us doing something wrong, being wrong, always getting it wrong. But in reality, the injustice that we experience was never corrected.
Yeah.
What it did to how we see ourselves in the world was altered, right? So we start having these distorted images of who we are, which aren't rooted in truth, but rooted in the harm.
Because a lot of victims of SA, of assault, they grow up, if they are unhealed, to be very promiscuous. because they don't know their worth, because of the things that they went through made them feel unworthy of love, and so they freely give their body away because they're constantly looking for that love outside of themselves. And so again, it's very important to take the time to go within and acknowledge those things, because such traumatic events can be very detrimental, and it does change the way you view the world and view yourself within the world, because you feel unworthy of having the things that other people have, because you feel undeserving, and so it's a domino effect, a negative domino effect, especially if you don't address it.
Yeah, I can see, I understand what you're saying. Like there's a pattern that exists, right? Sometimes it's hypersexuality or just this kind of sexually acting out that's rooted in sexual harm. Very different from, a woman who's standing in her truth and, displays her sexuality or engages in sex as she chooses, right? That is of her choosing. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. And so when I asked you about the harm, you talked about it augmenting your mental health. And I want you to talk a little bit more of what that looks like in terms of what did your silence cost you?
It cost me my freedom. It cost me my freedom because I was still in that people pleasing mode. I was still allowing the people around me to take advantage of me. It was still okay. Even though this person treats me this way, I don't see anything wrong with it, because I'm still going to bend over backward for this person. I'm still going to go out of my way to do these things. I'm still running around with my cup empty while I'm trying to fill other people's cup up. And so it really cost me my freedom. And again, I will always go back to the fact of it's really important. If it's not equal give and take, if they're not refilling your cup, you have to let those people go. People, places, addictions. I smoked for a long time, and I had to realize why. And once I understood that I was using it as a coping mechanism, as I was using it for my anxiety. I was using it when I was stressed, overstimulated. Once I pinpointed the reasons for me using, I was able to release that addiction. I was able to pick up better and healthier habits. So it's a mind over matter thing, but it really did cost me my freedom.
And I think everybody can attest to that. There are so many things that we experience living within this system of all the ailments that one, I think women are socialized to be caretakers, but untreated, unhealed trauma definitely can easily turn us into people pleasers. And you're right, people pleasers, you're giving and you never get in return. And that does hold you hostage and take your freedom away, right? Because you're using all of not just your energy, but your time to meet other people's needs and not your own. And it's so beautiful to hear you talk about how you were able to break from that, because you talked about how, your children were a motivation for you, and what you model for them is who they're going to be.
Yeah.
And so you broke this generational pattern, right? With your mom. She wasn't able to give you the parenting that you needed, but you're able to break that cycle and not replicate what she did and do something totally different to give your children what they need.
Yeah.
That's I think that's such a beautiful depiction and really helpful for people to see, because I think sometimes it's hard to strive for what you don't see, but if you can see it in another person, then it becomes plausible and doable.
Yes.
I also just want to be clear in the question, what did your silence cost you? Not the silence like when you were a child, but I mean the silence as an adult, right? Who is quite removed from childhood trauma. Because obviously as a child, even as a young adult, that ownership is not on you, right? You were the person who was victimized.
Yeah.
And so, you already talked a little bit about how you broke free, but I'm curious, is there anything else? Like, you obviously separated yourself from your family. You deep dived into your relationship with God. You used, journaling and writing, authoring this book as another tool to help you. I'm curious, was there anything else that helped you break free from holding your truth back from the people who were responsible for hurting you, as well as just the general public?
I began to nurture my inner child. I began to find out what her needs was and what she needed. And through my children, I was able to do that as well. It's so easy to parent your children by being the type of parent you would have wanted to have, during that time period of your life. And so really nurturing my inner child and listening to her needs. And, as far as I'm concerned, it was buying a pair of pink and white Chicago skates that I wanted as a kid, that really helped me embrace my truth, because then I was living authentically at that point. And so at that point, when you're a child, you still have your innocence to some point. You still have that freedom. They say children say the darndest things, right? And so really nurturing my inner child and going back into that time period really gave me the courage to be able to speak my truth freely, because I was in an adult body. Those people were no longer around me to harm me. And once my inner child understood that, I could start speaking my truth.
That's it. That's the part, right? This right here is the part. If you don't get anything else, I think this is the most important part. Once you reconnect with your inner child, right? And you're using the lens of an adult speaking to a child, right? To explain that the monsters that existed aren't actually able to hurt you any longer. They don't have access to you. You actually are being protected by me, the adult version of me. I have access to resources, right? I physically can protect you. It's that understanding, right? That I think once that switch is flipped, the opportunities that exist are just plentiful.
Yes.
I love that you shared that. I also love that you shared essentially what I heard you say is that you were reparenting yourself while you were parenting your child. Yeah. And I think so many people do that without even knowing it, right? Like Kimberly Crenshaw always talks about the importance of language, right? Like when she coined that term intersectionality, there was a need for it. She wasn't the first person to talk about intersectionality. Yeah. However, there was a need to make it succinct without giving 8 examples, right? Yeah. So she created that term. And I think what you're talking about is something that the reparenting thing is something that we all kind of do, right? Especially if you're moving from a place of what my parents gave me was not it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was not it. And respectfully, it couldn't be it because they didn't have it. Yeah. However, we were blessed to be born in a time where we had so much exposure to education and information and different ways of doing things and healing and therapy and recovery. And so, it can be that simple.
Yeah.
If you're moving from a place, I don't want to do what was done to me. So then what do? Minimally, you do the opposite. Yeah. If someone didn't talk to you enough, you do a lot of talking.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. If someone didn't hug you and you wanted that touch, you do a lot of hugging.
Yes.
That's I think that's one of the quickest ways to recover yourself and help yourself heal while you're able to pour into the people that matter the most to you, your little ones.
Yes, indeed.
That's so helpful. I really appreciate you sharing that. That's really, really, really critical. And it can be challenging work, but it's also very fun.
It is.
Right?
It is. My babies, they definitely keep me on my toes. And like I said, I really don't consider it living through them, just living with them, because we have to establish boundaries with that as well, because a lot of times you find yourself trying to push your children in directions that they really don't want to go through because that's something that you want to do. And so you have to be respectful of their boundaries, nurture their gifts and talents, and let them find their individual selves, and just be there for them, support them. And you guys can go and swing on the swing at the park together type of thing, and you got to release the fear of judgment. Don't let people inflict their own opinions and thoughts onto how you live your life, because that's part of the lessons we're here to learn, is how to be ourselves uniquely and unapologetically.
Drop those gems.
Yes.
Ashe and amen. I love that. That's so poignant, right? When you reconnect with your inner child and you do the work to heal her, then you have the opportunity to live with your children in a happy, safe way and not live through them. Because we see so many parents do that, right? Well, my parents didn't have the money. They didn't have the resources for me to be able to do this. So I'm going to give this to you and you're going to take it.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. Don't take away their free will.
Right. That part. Because you are conditioning them and to not have free thought or emotion. So That's so important. I really love that you said that. Okay, so my last question is, you've left us with so many gems. I really hope you all check out her TikTok, and her podcast, and her book, right? I think this is going to be so therapeutic and healing for so many people. And so you've said kind of everything, but I'm wondering, is there anything else? What do you want everybody to take from this?
I want people to be encouraged, to be inspired, not only just to speak their own truths, but to go back and help others that are still struggling. It's a lot of gatekeepers in the world today. And so if we really want to do God's work, then be encouraged to go and be a voice, be a vessel. Don't sit on the things that especially if it could help the next person. And don't be so quick to judge a book by its cover or speak on other people's life, because you don't know what that child is going through behind closed doors. You don't know what that coworker that came in angry that morning had to deal with before showing up to work. And so let's be mindful of our words. Let's be mindful of the way that we treat other people. Let's move in love, and more importantly, move with intention. Move with intention.
I don't want to say anything behind what you just said, because I think that was enough. Enough. I'm not going to use any reflective listening. No, that was it. That was the gift. That was the gift. Kwamisha, I really want to thank you for sitting down with me, for being so open, and again, just giving with the hope that other people will take to heal themselves. This is how we rebuild community.
Indeed.
Right. This is how we sustain our own healing. This is a gift. You are the gift. And I thank you very much.
I'm so appreciative of this opportunity. You're going to be seeing a lot more of me, prayerfully. But definitely keep in touch, stay up to date with me. Again, like I said, I'm just the voice. I'm just a vessel. And I'm just here to do God's work,
Ashe. I receive all of that, but not just, right?
Yeah.
No. You are the voice. You are the vessel. And we see you and we hear you. We're standing in solidarity with you and in protection of you. And we want to do our part to amplify your voice and lift you up. So thank you for being in community with me and with all of our listeners. Obviously, we're going to be seeing more of you because we see your light as is. So let's check out, again, her book, In My Mother's Shadow, and her website, her podcast, and she is on TikTok, y'all. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all next week. Be well, everyone.
Be well.